Our lives are a string of insights, flashes of inspiration that can be the catalyst for new ideas. However, our pace of life these days means we tend to miss some of them completely. I'm Dave Hill, and I'm the host of the Simple Reflections podcast, a fortnightly series of interviews with people from all walks of life. Our conversations are an invitation to reflect on some of the simple insights my guests have had that have gone on to have a profound impact on their lives. So grab a cuppa and a biscuit, join us, slow down for a little while and see what shows up for you. Welcome to the next episode of the Simple Reflections podcast. Today I'm joined by a lovely chap called Al Milledge. Al and I have known each other for a few years now, but he's a three principles-based coach and facilitator living on the south coast of the UK in a place near Eastbourne. And as I mentioned, we've met a few times through a combination of One Thought, and in fact, we've both been trained by them at times, and the work that he's done with Beyond Recovery in the past. And you've heard a little bit about them in previous episodes of this. But interestingly about Al, the reason this whole podcast came about was a conversation I had with him nearly 2 years ago for a project I was doing called Missing in Action with two of my friends, Paul and Sylvie. And at the end of that, someone chimed up and said, Dave, you should have a podcast. And from that throwaway thought, the Simple Reflections podcast came to be. So I'm always smiling and remembering that conversation when I start this. And today I managed to get Al along to join us. So thank you so much for coming.
Thanks for inviting me, Dave. It's great to be here. And I've never heard that story before. So, yeah.
There we go. There you go. Well, yes, it's funny how these things happen.
Mm.
The loose theme of this podcast is how we learn through insight, how our life is guided by that, whether we know it or not. And I wondered, how does that look today for you? What's lighting up your world around that at the moment, Al?
Yeah, it's really timely that you asked me that question, Dave, because things have really kind of expanded for me in the last few months, but particularly actually in the last couple of weeks. Had a tough couple of years with, losing mum, dad, sister. And it's funny because being around this understanding and knowing that it's kind of running the show, whether I know it or not. Sometimes I know it, sometimes I really don't know it. There's an assumption that you're going to just get through things, And I was, I kind of got through things when the events happened. I got through them okay. I felt like I'd really kind of, appreciated the people that I'd lost and was really connected to them. And then about 3 or 4 or 5 months later, I really started to struggle again. And I didn't know what it was. It felt like it was something to do with that, but I didn't know what it was. And I got a bit lost. And I carried on working and life was good. And, in comparison to the life that I used to have and the amount of time that I spent in my head, it was more than good. I was very grateful for what I've learned and what I've kind of built into allowed to build into the system. But I suppose it occurs to me to say this to you because I speak to so many clients who, after 3 or 4 conversations, they really start to see change in their lives. And then maybe 2 or 3, 4 months later, they'll call me and just go, I've lost everything. I'm panicking. It's just what's going on. I just seem to have kind of forgotten everything that we've talked about. And I just want to remind people that I think however long you've been around this conversation, and it's only about 7 or 8 years for me, that there are parts of life that just trip you up, And I've got really gentle with myself in the last few weeks. And I've noticed the more gentle I've got, the more all of that, whatever it was that was seemed to be holding me down physically and mentally, has just disappeared. And it's fascinating to look at it that way, that all I needed to do was just to relax, just to remind myself of who I am. There was nothing to positively do. There was no spin to put on it. There was just that, oh, okay, yeah. You know what this feels like, and then it feels to me like the more I remind myself, you know what this feels like, the more I just kind of gently fall back into that position of feeling healthy and well and comfortable and ready to be with other people in whatever they're doing. There's that famous saying, isn't there? It's not about thinking less of yourself. It's just about thinking of yourself less. And for some reason, that's been ringing in my head for the last few weeks. Yeah. So maybe there was some of that going on too.
Yeah, I think everyone will be able to relate to that in some way, in terms of when our boat feels rocked, when things aren't going as smoothly as we'd hoped, it looks like effort is required in order to be able to right that. And it almost feels negligent not to. And again, I can attest to that from periods in life for me where it's looked like, right, yeah, this is unraveling, and I need to work hard to stop it unraveling further. And all my efforts seemed to do was make it run faster. The picture that springs to mind just from me talking about a boat becoming unsettled is the sort of lurching from one side to the other to try and balance it, and probably making a bad job, and probably ending up getting quite wet. So that's the only thing that sort of makes me giggle on that front. You mentioned, I'm really sorry to hear of the losses that you've been through this year. What would you say? What would you say has been the sort of biggest learning for you in that?
I think the biggest learning was that I'm trying to avoid a cliche.
Cliches can be helpful at times.
They can be helpful at times, yeah. And it's just popped into my head for the first time. I don't think I've ever said it before, and it's just popped in. It's just that idea that if you love someone deeply, then there is going to be a fallout when you lose them, And I know that because, I've lost plenty of people in the past. But I really felt that this time round. I really felt that, there's the practicalities, there's the emotional kind of fallout of death and losing someone when it first happens. And then there's immediately the practicalities because of the culture that we live in. And it just so happened with, my mum and dad, that was down to me. So you kind of step up, I think you said that just now, you step up, you step into it, you do what needs to be done. And then that just seems to kind of push you forward for a while. And then there's, then something will just kind of arrive and you think, oh, yeah, of course, that deep love that I had for those people is going to create a missing in me. It's going to create something in me that feels like there's something lost, But of course, this is all in retrospect. At the time, it's just a pain, It's just a pain in my chest. And it seems so obvious to apply one to the other. And of course, when I sit down with a client, so many of whom, have lost people, especially over the last few years, and I listen to their experience of the loss, that is commonplace, but it still doesn't, for some reason, make it obvious to me when it happens to me.
Mm.
And I'm still a little bit fascinated by that. But my learning is just, I guess, is what I said to you just now, is that idea that there's always more and more and more for me not to do with my mental gymnastics. There's always less to think about. There's always less to try and control. There's always less to try and not be with. And I guess one of the things that I really learned over the last year or two is just to be with whatever's happening. And not think about, oh, it will pass. This thought will pass. We're so used to having this idea that there's so many thoughts that go through our head every day that there'll be a fresh one coming up and all of that. And that's true. But without chasing that new experience, I seem to allow the old experience to settle in me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's something really valuable in there somewhere. But I don't think it's a doing. It's certainly not something that I would apply, just to a client, or I wouldn't suggest anybody did it. It's just that something that I've noticed in myself is that when I really, really sat with it and really allowed the time and the experience and, not panicking about whatever else had to be done, then there was something really, something solved itself, And now my feeling about all three of those people is generally just, a real love for who they were when they were here,
Mm-hmm.
and it's, yeah, I didn't know we were going to talk about this, Dave, but it's, it's, yeah. Yeah. So that's where I am with it. And it's just, there's a beauty to it now. And that's how I feel at the moment. And I might not feel like that tomorrow, but that's how I feel at the moment, is that there's a real beauty to the love that I had to those people and for the memory of the experience that I had with them, Yeah. And I write a lot. So I allow myself to just write about my mum and my dad particularly. And by writing about them and writing about them from an empty mind, I'm fascinated with the stories that just pop up
Mm-hmm.
that I probably haven't heard since I was 7 or 8 years old,
Mm.
and they just suddenly, they're back in my consciousness, and I can do something interesting with them on the page and then create a story out of it. And it's just, yeah, all of that is, I feel incredibly grateful for seeing the world through the lens that I see it at the moment, for all of those reasons.
Thank you for sharing that. And there's no pussyfooting around this subject. It's a tough one for people, for all of us, and it's something that is natural and part of the human experience, and it probably needs more bandwidth and airtime than it gets because of the worry of causing upset, and so people sort of shy away from it. And so no, I thank you so much for taking the question on. But it raises an interesting thing that forms sort of part of the backbone of a coaching relationship, I suppose, and also something that I've been curious about from probably the age, I think I probably first came aware of it sort of 18 or 19. And that is, things look obvious from the outside when we're looking at others and what's going on for them. And we can see, yeah, well, this equals that, and that. So I can see how that's playing out. But we struggle to do that with our own experience and what's going on, even though we're involved potentially in that same scenario. So, the thing that brought it into stark contrast for me at that sort of 18, 19, when I was doing my Army Officer Selection Board to get to Sandhurst. It's a sort of 3.5 day interview testing phase with a group of 7 others. And sitting in that group of 8, I could see those that were absolutely smashing it and those that were really struggling. And I had absolutely no idea where I sat in the spectrum of that at all. And therefore spent a very nervous 24 hours waiting for the letter to come and land on the door to tell me what my fate was. And that just went, well, how can that be? I can see how everybody else is doing. And actually my predictions weren't, I eventually went back to work at the same place. So I dug out the file from my time there and was able to see that I was right about where everybody else sat, and surprised to see where I did. But it's really interesting to see how on point we can be with other people and really not understand that for ourselves. And for me, that forms the basis of a coaching relationship. The role that you and I have is to provide a second set of eyes and ears, and a different perspective for people, for the things that matter most to them in their world, that they are struggling to see what the next step might be. And as a result of not knowing what that is, normally it equals inaction or avoidance or running in the opposite direction. But the beauty of the relationship that a coach has with their client, or a client has with their coach, actually, probably the better way to put it, is that bond of trust built on understanding and a lack of judgment. And it creates such an open space, almost like, rather than it being a playing field or a football pitch, which is defined and has space to it. It's just open space where we get to make it up in that moment and see what the art of the possible might be. And, your story about what's just been going on and how, looking at it objectively from the outside, it looks quite obvious. But when we're in the moment, when we're caught up in it, when it feels viscerally unavoidable for us, that we go, well, how did that, I know this, but I was feeling that. How can that be? And that's just the nature of being a human being.
Yeah. Yeah. I was thinking while you were talking that it's, I do a lot of men's work, and I do, I'm involved in men's groups locally here. And the kind of the framework around it is that we build a fire and we sit around the fire and we check in. And then we go and do whatever it is we're going to do. We kind of cook or whatever the day holds for us. And I just love what you were just saying then about, even in your, the energy of you having to go into that interview and having three odd days of it, you could still notice what was going on for other people. And I think that's just such a valuable thing to the way that you and I work at the moment, which is, I know to go quiet, and I know what quiet feels like now. I know what listening used to mean, and I know what it means now for me. And in that quietness, I can get so much information, but also so much energy from a man that's talking. I can hear what's going on for him under the words, maybe. But more importantly, I think that when you can create that for other people, they hear something fresh. from what they're saying. We're so used to being helped out, in conversations. We're so used to being listened to because the other person will not speak, and then immediately we finish speaking, then they will jump in with the idea that they had 5 minutes ago. It's fine. It's what people do. It's we're trying to be helpful. We're all trying to do that. But I've noticed recently, particularly in those situations where I can find real quietness in myself, and then people come up with their own solutions, literally without a gap. They'll tell me all of the stuff that's going on for them, and then they'll see the solution without barely a breath. And I'm fascinated with the power of that. I'm fascinated with, the idea that this is going on for all of us all of the time, that, this is the system that works us, and that we can notice it with a little bit of compassion or quiet or something a little bit extra than we're used to.
Mm-hmm.
So I never kind of talk about the principles when I'm doing men's work. It just doesn't occur to me to do that. But that's what I do now, is I just get very quiet with people and I notice how much they can see for themselves. So thanks for saying what you said, because that's really kind of clarified that for me, is that we can see it for ourselves when we sit in the presence of quiet with other people, maybe, or when we can find a bit of quiet in them, in our own heads.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's funny because we talk about coaching, and I know that we've got a couple of places that you and I are hanging out at the moment, which is, learning more about that kind of stuff. And it's so interesting, all of that. The whole process of coaching is a really interesting process, and I like to learn about it. But I like to learn about it through this lens that I have now. It really makes a huge difference, because however many things I hear from other people and their great ideas and their processes and all of that kind of stuff, it only works if it sits comfortably within what I already know about myself and sitting with other people. So, yeah, I don't know why I went off on that track, but it just occurred to me to do that, because I think there's such a natural way that we can coach each other. There's the process of coaching that you and I have learned over the years. And then there's this thing that we can just do for each other as humans, which is just to sit with a bit of quiet and allow people to work out what's going on for them, how they might thrive even while that's going on.
I think that's one of the exciting byproducts of the work that we do, is our clients, the people that we work with, having an embodied understanding of what it feels like to be quiet in themselves, to trust that and to know that that is always available for them. And that, I'm not going to say better, but clearer solutions come from that place for them, clearer ideas. And that knowing that they'll go off into the world in their own lives, work, at home, wherever it might be, and they'll have the confidence to be that for others, which will allow them to experience the same thing. It's almost like creating ripples or puddles of quietness in a way that reach way beyond, our view of what's possible with the person that we're speaking to in that moment. But we know something is going to shift beyond the conversation that we're having, and likely to be in a really positive and encouraging way for a whole load of other people in their lives.
Yeah, beautiful. It's that again, it's so obvious once you see it, but I really didn't see it for decades, that if I have a restricted mind, then I have restricted options. So the tighter my mind gets, the more I identify with who I am and what I've done and my personality and all of these other markers, the less I can see possibility in the world.
Mm.
And for me, I mean, I think because we both work with men, there's a certain kind of there's a certain, well, it's obvious, I'm going to be this kind of bloke, and of course it's true for them, in the way that it's true for them. But just easing under the surface of that is just a tiny bit of easing under the surface of that is so useful for people to know that they can be anything and be all of those things that they call themselves,
Mm.
which gives us more options. It's in my life, it's given me options I never knew I had access to. I had no idea, that I could do the things that I've done so far. With I'm probably overplaying it now. I don't know if you do this, Dave, but when I go back to kind of, when I knew this, I think maybe I overplay a little bit about how restricted my life was, about how anxious I was and how depressed I could get, all of these kind of things. I've got words for it now that I probably wouldn't have had at the time. And I was probably getting on with life. But I've got to say that my interior life, the life in my head, was really uncomfortable most of the time. That's what it seemed like to me.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what's gone. And I didn't know how much time I was taking housekeeping all of that. It was just taking up all of when I wasn't doing something else or talking to somebody, I was housekeeping this stuff that was going on in my head. And I don't have to do much of that anymore, It's like I've got somebody in to do it for me or something, And they always seem to put things back where I want them. I've got no idea how that works, but I can't overemphasize how much time it's given me back.
Mm.
Yeah.
I think that the word that jumps out to me there is trusting in that. It comes back to that bit I was saying earlier on about negligence. It feels negligent if things feel out of place and disordered and overwhelming. It looks obvious that things need to be done to do the housekeeping, to get things shipshape and back in the right place, so things are ordered and we're in a good place to step off again. It just looks naturally like the logical thing to do. But as you've spotted, as I've seen for myself, actually, the thing that's unsettled and feels unsettled is the indicator that it's my stirring that's creating the discomfort and the unsettled nature. So if I stop stirring, that will just naturally grind to a halt, and from there, things will look clearer. And in the past, that's looked like luck when I've thought, actually, I just need to give myself some space here, or someone's invited me to, when actually that's how it's always worked. Whatever the situation, when my mind has been racing at 100 miles an hour, the only thing that changes that is the thinking I've got about that particular activity. Now, at the time, I wouldn't have seen it like that. But looking back, it's exactly what happened. My thoughts on it shifted, either because time had marched on and more information had come along, or I'd started doing the activity, or I'd not started doing the activity, I'd gone away from it. But something had shifted that allowed my mind to shift too. And now knowing that is always there, that is always how it works for all of us 100% of the time, makes life a lot simpler and allows the housekeeping to sort itself out.
Yeah, well put. I think because I come from a yoga background, when I was really struggling, I was a builder for a long time, and I was really struggling in physically and mentally. And it just occurred to me to go and do some hot yoga. And then before I knew it, I was doing 4 days a week, So I don't think I was doing yoga. Actually, I was just going and disappearing for 3 hours a day for 4 days a week. But one thing I learned after about 6 or 8 months of really trying to do well with my yoga, one thing I learned there was that I needed to relax to be able to find the postures that I was looking for.
Mm.
Even standing on one leg, even balancing, I just needed to find the relaxation, more and more and more and more relaxation. And I don't know about you, but that's what tips me off these days, is that I'm getting too interested in something that isn't worth my time. Is the
Yeah.
feeling in my body. I get stressed, I get it in the jaw, or I just get it in my breath. I can notice my breathing changes or whatever. And most of the time, with exceptions, it's the feeling of that in my body that makes me think, oh yeah, okay, whatever this is, it's not worth my time. So the detail of all of it, which was suddenly, was really important to me a few moments before. I just, okay, yeah, just not bother with that. I can't be bothered with that. And it's just like relaxing, like pushing your shoulder, just allowing your shoulders to drop, or just realizing that your breath's a bit irregulated, and you just need to kind of allow your body to go back into stasis again. It's just it becomes natural when you stop. For me, it becomes natural when I stop, as you say, stirring. For me, it's kind of that detail,
Mm.
more detail, more detail, more detail. If I only just kind of like, if I can only focus on that central thing, the creation of whatever this problem is, if I can only focus on that for long enough or sharp enough or whatever, then I'm going to get there. And inevitably what happens is I relax and I walk away, and then 2 hours later, just phone that person, just text that person, just, oh yeah, I know what I want to write. I know how this goes, or, the simplicity of it is just still astounds me
Mm.
on a daily basis. And it's hard to talk to people about this kind of stuff, which is why I love the idea of a podcast where people can, listen in their ear like I do to you and your guests. It's because when you're caught up in that, it doesn't feel like that at all. It just, you just think, oh, well, you're just swiping it away, you're just pretending. But the truth is that our intellects are so good at keeping us safe that they're not so good at coming up with great ideas that will save us half a day's time. It's just this idea that, I hate to split this up too much, into intellect and wisdom, but that's how it kind of seems to me, is that when I get tight about something, that when I first started to learn to drive, and I remember it was kind of mirror signal maneuver, and is that car too close for me to pull out? And there was 100 things going on in my head. And now I can jump into a car I've never driven before, and there might be a few bits of it that don't feel right, but things are happening all at the same time without me thinking about it. I'm looking out the window to make sure that there's no traffic. And to me, there's the learning of it, and then there's the relaxing into the learning of it.
Mm.
And those two things they can be quite smooth if we go with the feeling rather than the information.
Mm. Yeah. That, and that tension of doing something new, whether that's, or even or something that we're invested in. So, that your thought, your point there of needing to relax into the pose, and that made it, made it easier to achieve, versus I need to get this right, which is why we're tense in the first place. That applies to learning to drive, as you mentioned. That that applies to athletes that are in a pressure situation, taking a big shot or whatever it might be, and you can see whether they're tense or not. And that you know that tension in their body isn't going to allow them to play as smoothly as they would want. And that's going to potentially rev their mind up some more until it doesn't. And as you say, the guide in there is the feeling that we're experiencing in our body. And when we clock that, when we go, oh yeah, I'm holding myself tightly here, well, I know that's not helpful. We can sort of separate the feeling that we're experiencing, that the indicator, from the clutter of the noise in our mind that we thought's created it, because it's been our relationship with that noise in our mind that's probably brought that feeling around. But as soon as we see that, it's like, okay, yeah, that's not a thing. And all of a sudden, our perspective on the situation shifts, and we, as you say, relax into it, and that knowing that that's always possible, no matter what. You know, I remember a couple of years ago now, someone sending me some blogs that they'd written privately. So I won't go into a huge amount of detail, but it was based around their experience in Afghanistan. And I think the individual was 18 or 19 at the time. And the whole section, so 8 or so people, all felt uncomfortable stepping into the field that they needed to move across. They all just felt uncomfortable about it, that something was going to go wrong. And it did. The world erupted and they were getting shot at from all over the place. And his initial thoughts, whilst lying flat on the ground, trying to get as small as he possibly could, was that everybody else is dead. I can't hear anything. And that I don't want to die here. I don't want that to be a thing. And then his thoughts shifting to, well, the only way that's going to change is if I try and do something about it. I'm definitely not going to survive if I stay where I am. And the only thing I can do is act. At which point he lifted his head up a little bit and could see that everybody else was still there. And they all managed to extract themselves from that situation. But the initial shock and wave of thoughts that filled his mind did an amazing job to keep him safe. It got him as small as he possibly could. But it was almost the acceptance that death is an inevitability here, that it's going to happen no matter what. But the only way that I've got any control over that is doing something. And his whole being shifted, and he was able to survive that moment. That's a really literally life or death situation. But we all do that all day long, every day, with whatever's going on in our mind, whether it's the teenager thinking about, do I ask this person out or not? Crikey, what happens if they say no? Or I can't really apply for that job, or whatever it might be. The discomfort is letting us know that we are adding layers of complexity to the situation, and that if we relax a little bit, we might see things differently. And I love that about the work that we do.
Me too. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that as well. It was just, it's so powerful to see that it's working for us, whether we know it or not, especially in a situation like that where, there's I assume a heightened state of, what do I do next? Yeah, it's powerful.
Al, this has been a lot of fun, as it normally is when we have a conversation. So thank you so much so much for coming. This being early January, how do people find you if they want to get in touch?
Just go to almilledge.com, ALMILLEDGE, and everything that I'm doing always gets posted up there. And if you're around the Hastings, Bexhill area, then I'm getting more and more involved in local work here. So just get in touch and love to have a conversation.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, Dave.
You're very welcome.
See you again.
Thanks again for joining us today. I'm sitting here smiling as I think about whether this little add on the end should have a name. It feels like parish notices to me, but there we go. I just wanted to remind you that I've got a workshop coming up on the 12th of March around the role of clarity in decision making. I've also just started a free weekly call with my good friend Lynn Brannigan. You may remember Lynn from episode 43 back in November. Lynn and I are now doing a free 30-minute call on Wednesdays called Bite Size Breather. It's at 10:30 UK time on Zoom. If you'd like to come and join us, please do so. And lastly, if you'd like to help support the show, either by subscribing yourself, sharing with other people, or hitting the support the show link, all of that is greatly appreciated. Thanks again for joining us. All the details of the things I've mentioned are in the show notes, and I look forward to you joining me on future episodes. Take care. Thank you for joining us today. If you've enjoyed the conversation, feel free to subscribe and join me and my new guest next time. If you're interested in the work I'm doing, or you think I can be of service to you or your organisation, please email dave@simplicityofmind.co.uk. Remember, see if you can find time to slow down and reflect. Those simple ideas might be worth listening to. Take care, and I hope you can join me in a couple of weeks.